You're listening to Compliance Conversations, your inside scoop on all things healthcare compliance, auditing, and coding. Now, let's get on with the show.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Compliance Conversations. I am CJ Wolf, and our guest today is Clint Narver. Welcome, Clint.
Hey, CJ. Thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure to speak with you today.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. Clint, I think we may have first rubbed shoulders at the HCCA's Compliance Enforcement Conference in DC in November. You were there, right, speaking?
Yeah, I was there, and it was a fantastic event. I've had the opportunity and privilege to be a part of that HCCA events for a while now, and it's always super informative and good to meet new folks, such as us meeting this time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Clint, before we jump into our topics, we love to have our guests tell the audience a little bit about themselves. Tell us kind of what you do and as much as you want to share.
Absolutely. So I am a partner at the law firm McGuireWoods. I'm based in Washington, D.C., and I'm in the government investigations and white collar litigation practice group. A lot of my work is in the healthcare space. Not all of it. I handle corporate criminal investigations, civil investigations, and litigation, including trials and appeals. A lot of my work is also within healthcare is also specific to the FDA. I've got a lot of experience there. But it sort of spans, it spans a wide range of matters that pop up in just the government enforcement sector. I would note that prior to being at McGuireWoods, so I joined the firm last year, and I was a federal prosecutor for many, many years at the Department of Justice. I was in the consumer protection branch, where I handled a lot of cases involving healthcare and FDA-regulated drugs and devices and clinical research, as well as financial fraud and nursing home fraud and things of that type. And prior to that, I'd worked at the FDA, and I did some of the same type of work there at the FDA. I was a special assistant U.S. attorney, so handling litigation, but also was in a role of providing legal advice to the drug and device centers at the FDA and in connection with a lot of enforcement activity. So that's my bio in a nutshell.
Yeah, what a fascinating background. So you have that experience of having been inside the government, see kind of what they're looking at, how entities like life science companies, for example, and other organizations need to comply with these things from a government perspective. And now you're in private practice. So
yeah, and it's exactly. And so I really enjoyed my time in government, and I got a lot out of it and learned a lot. I started to see patterns and instances where I just really thought, like in some enforcement areas, you're dealing with a type of criminality that's just purely criminal conduct. But in the healthcare sector, it's not like that at all. It's really, you have a lot of good businesses and good people that are trying to navigate these highly complex regulations and legal requirements. And, sometimes you even have strict liability for companies and individuals so even if you are doing things the right way, technically you may be in violation of the law. If you're doing things with the right intentions, I should say. And exactly. I just continued to see things along those lines and really was intrigued by the idea of working more with those folks and trying to help them help themselves. And put them in a position where they're able to navigate this complex realm.
Yeah, totally understand, right? Like we know there's a handful of people out there that wake up in the morning and they want to cheat and lie and scheme. And then there's a lot of people who are in healthcare, which is, as you said, highly regulated, and they're trying to do good things, but it's hard to navigate all of these complex rules. And sometimes you can get caught up in that. Even with some decent intentions, and we all want good drugs and medical devices, and we all want good care. And a lot of this is amplified because when people get harmed or potentially harmed, all of the magnifying glass kind of can amplified. And we thought we would talk a little bit today. I know you have a lot of experience in the research realm. So maybe we just kind of set the stage and you tell us a little bit about some current, and then we can dig a little deeper, maybe kind of current and future trends as it relates to the research in healthcare.
Sure. So, yeah, I've got a fair amount of experience in clinical research and in non-clinical research as well. I mean, a lot of it has to do with FDA-regulated products.
Okay.
And so I've sort of started working in this area back when I was at the FDA, which was more in a regulatory capacity, providing advice and guidance to the agency on certain issues that would pop up in the research of FDA-regulated products. Okay. When I transitioned to the Department of Justice, I ended up continuing that work sort of fortuitously, as we started seeing more and more referrals around research misconduct. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes that was, again, involving FDA-regulated products, clinical research in particular, but broader than that. And so what I've sort of seen over the years and how it's manifested today, I would say it's become a focus of both the Department of Justice and the FDA, also of HHS, which, FDA is obviously a part of HHS, but right. HHS can sometimes sort of operate differently. HHS OIG, for example. It manifests in various ways. I mean, sort of I'll start at sort of the highest end, I would say, of the enforcement scale. There has been a lot of criminal investigation and litigation around research fraud. Most of it, I use that term specifically, research fraud, because we're dealing with things like medical researchers who are intentionally trying to lie about the research they're conducting. Often they're lying about the participation of research subjects, and lying about the data, and they're doing it in an effort to make money. And right. And sometimes it involves federal dollars. The research can involve federal dollars, which is one thing that gets the government to look at it more closely and to investigate it. But it's interesting because, like, whereas in a lot of the healthcare space, like for False Claims Act matters, for example, federal dollars is a necessary component. Like that you're not going to have an FCA case without that. In the research context, however, I have seen plenty of investigations and plenty of government interest where there is not a federal dollar component, and that's because you're dealing with research subjects, human beings who are agreeing to participate in this research, right? Who potentially being put at risk. And you also have that sort of one pillar, and then the other is the data integrity. And the data right. here, as you know, the data is ultimately provided to the FDA, where the scientists and medical doctors are relying on it in order to make significant decisions about drug approvals, device approvals, vaccine. Right. And even a little bit of skewed data could, in certain scenarios, cause them to make a decision based on bad science, based on lies. And, right. and then you potentially have a drug that is approved or is not approved based on the research fraud. So I say all that to emphasize that, even when there's not a lot of fraud loss in terms of money or right. federal dollars at stake, those other considerations can really ratchet up the government's interest and lead to significant consequences. And so research fraud, the criminal component is one big area of emphasis. There's also been this tends to fall more in the civil side, but there's also been a lot of hard looking at the grant application process. And exactly. Yeah, you probably seen that yourself, and looking at the statements that are made by folks who are obtaining grants from the federal government, particularly from NIH. And that can lead to False Claims Act liability.
Right.
When there are false statements, and the false statements can be about all different types of things. They need to be
Right.
material, but you know, it's an area that we have seen increased emphasis in that space.
Yeah, I actually was reading a case recently, of course this is public, about somebody, a researcher, a physician who it was alleged that lied on one of these applications to get NIH grant money. And one of the specific lies was he said that there was a certain number of genetically engineered mice already prepared and ready for the study. In other words, trying to show, look, choose me as the recipient of this grant because I'm ready to run. I'm ready to go. And I'm ready because these genetically engineered mice are ready. And that's a key part of my research or of this research. And it turned out, or the allegation was at least, that was not true. And so I'm assuming those are the kinds of things you're talking about. That may be a very specific example, but essentially when a researcher is filling out a grant application, you have to be truthful in all aspects.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And so you know, the example you pointed to is a great one, because you can see how from one perspective, somebody might look at that statement and think, well, he shouldn't have said that, but
right.
is it really, you know, is this a federal case? You know, should the federal government be coming in? But it is, because you know, as you were alluding to, it could have been one of the factors that caused the government to provide funds, because they, you know, the reason he was making the statement, presumably,
right,
is to sort of tip the scale a little bit. And so when you're, you know, you could be making a statement about something like that. You could be making a statement about some of the preclinical work that's been done that maybe you know, you mischaracterize it to suggest that your study is going to have a better chance of success, when really you don't have data to support that. You could be, you know, providing updates once you've received a grant, and those updates mischaracterize sort of what's going on in the lab.
Yeah.
Any number of those things can ultimately trigger serious government scrutiny.
Yeah. The other thing I was going to say too is we're aware of in the research realm, you know, a lot of us have conflicts of interest programs, and we know with NIH funded dollars, there are specific conflict of interest disclosure statements you must make, in particular as it relates to if you have any international or you know, outside of the US influence, right? And particularly they're looking at countries like China and others where researchers may be getting funding, and you know, you have to disclose that. And if you don't, I've noticed some researchers getting in trouble for those types of things too. Are you working in that space as well?
Yeah, so that is another area that I have seen while at DOJ, and there was a criminal prosecution, I think out of the Eastern District of Virginia. I may be getting that wrong, but there was a significant criminal prosecution about just that, about that concerned, I think it was a failure of an individual to indicate
right
an affiliation with China. And
yep.
You know, it's ultimately what the requirement is transparency. It's not, you know, no one
exactly.
is say you can't have these affiliations necessarily. I mean, some may say you can, some may say you can't.
Right.
But the crime or the civil violation is around not disclosing it, and you know, with some intent, with some knowledge that you're supposed to disclose it, and you decide not to because you want to get the grant money.
Yeah. And you mentioned a lot about life science companies. So I used to be a chief compliance officer for a medical device company, and you talked about how some research misconduct might not, you know, be directly tied to the False Claims Act, but I don't know, maybe you could talk about reputational harm, right? Because these are publicly traded companies frequently, and you're often releasing press releases. Hey, we just got approved for this device. You see stock prices go up. And with publicly traded companies, I don't know if you have much experience in that realm, but just the reputational harm. So we were always concerned about, let's make sure our research is spot on. Just number one, it's the right thing to do. But two, we're relying on that to drive a lot of investors and business decisions. Any thoughts in that realm?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, once you're in the healthcare space, you're already in a relatively small community. Now I know that tons of people, tons of businesses all over the globe, right? But
Right.
you start to see, once you're in it for a little bit, you start to see, the names of the companies, you start to see some of the same faces and some of the same, the same people again and again, and they may, over the course of their career, they go to different spots, but we all start to sort of know each other. And so I think about it in that framework sometimes, that when you're in a situation where you've even negligently or mistakenly, like you put data out there, or you said something about research being conducted in support of some healthcare related product that ultimately isn't true, or that's even highly debatable. Like sometimes I've seen these situations where you can get different groups of experts who are going to look at some clinical trial data and are going to, you can get two different opinions that are pretty divergent about, well, it says this, no, it doesn't, it says this. And you got to be careful in those situations about, if you're going to take one of those sides and promote it to the government and to the public, that you maintain your credibility in doing it. And because in this small community, I think that losing credibility, even if the government doesn't do anything about it, but losing credibility with your customers, with your peers, with all of the other sort of support organizations and businesses that you'll be working with, it's a problem. And it can, some people can still navigate it having done that, but a lot of times I think it goes sideways. And one of the ways it goes sideways is, well, you may not get business with these folks anymore who you're doing business with. I mean, there are alternatives to you. If you're at a certain point in the food chain here of research, you're potentially concerned about that. And one other thing it brings to mind, CJ, is just that and you've probably seen this as well, but is that there are in recent years, there have been an increasing number of more financial focused government investigations, including matters brought by the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission,
right,
concerning research misconduct or statements. It's really the research misconduct is the foundation for it. The focus of the government in those cases is what was said publicly to investors about the research or about the FDA's likelihood of approving this product. And the government has been focusing on that more as well too.
So interesting. We're going to take a quick break, everyone, and we're going to come back and talk some more about these fascinating topics with Clint. So hang in there, everyone. We'll be right back.
Compliance is complex, which is why you should visit Healthicity's Resource Center. It features updates on the OIG's new General Compliance Program guidance, CEU webinars, and more. Visit healthicity.com/resources today.
Welcome back from the break, everybody. We're talking to Clint Narver here, who has expertise both from the government experience as well as now private practice relating to all sorts of things in healthcare. But we're talking about research and FDA and all SEC and all these different things. Clint, you mentioned you had some experience, I think, correct me, with consumer protection or when you were with the government. One thing that I'm interested in, I mentioned when I was the chief compliance officer for a medical device company, we also were making sure that our marketing practices were fair. So like if we compared our product to another competitor's product, right, that we had fair consumer type of information out there. Tell us a little bit about your experience in consumer, if I heard that right when you introduced yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And you did hear me right. So I was the unit I was in at the Department of Justice most recently was the Consumer Protection Branch. And that's where you know, a lot of this type of work that I did took place. And the core focus was on protecting Americans from all different types of misrepresentations and fraud, involving a wide variety, not just healthcare, but a wide variety of goods and products and services. But a big part of it was related to drugs and medical devices. And I personally worked on a number of what became criminal investigations, prosecutions involving medical device companies. And you know, one of the things that pops up a lot in those spaces is how the company is promoting and marketing its products. And that's also something that comes up. I mean, I shouldn't say that I don't want to suggest it just comes up criminally, because it also comes up on a day-to-day basis for the FDA too, and other agencies. But at the FDA in particular is looking very closely at the statements that are made after a product is you know, PMA approved or 510(k) cleared. The statements that are being made to the public and to doctors about the efficacy of the product and how it works for certain patient populations, what the risks associated with use of the product are, et cetera, and making full disclosures about issues around the product. It's an area that, you know, a lot of the devil's in the details of the specific device you're talking about, and the specific sort of if you're talking about comparisons you're making to what your competitor across the street is doing.
Right.
There's a lot of, you know, maybe those products were approved different ways, or maybe they, you know, the FDA gave a little more credence to certain things in one product than it did to the other. So I would agree that it's a very important area for anybody in those sectors to be focused on. And it's also an area that you know, I think it's one of the things that's come up in some of my recent conversation is how is the administration change, or how does any administration change
Exactly,
you know, impact these various issues. And I think that promotional statements about significant medical products, prescription drugs, while I can see some, you know, slightly different views from one administration to another, I mean, those are just such fundamental aspects of our healthcare system that I think it's unlikely to be a sea change from one administration to the next.
Yeah, that's kind of what I've experienced too. I always kind of, in the past, you know, I've been doing compliance in healthcare for 25 years, and so I've seen a lot of presidents come and go. And I've kind of, people always ask what's going to happen with the new administration, and it's like, well, I can predict, and then I predict, and it's like, well, not a whole lot changed. Yeah, there are some nuances, but like you just said, almost everyone wants safe products, right? It's like, what do you know? I don't see like these major sea changes, like you said, but we never know.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, and this time around, I mean, you know, the FDA may be a place where there are some more visible changes to the outside world. I mean, I'm just saying that more based on the things we've all sort of seen in the past. But but I was actually at the Department of Justice across a few. I was there for a while, so I was there across a few different administrations, and I remember sitting there thinking, you know, having others talk about, well, we're not going to be working on these types of cases anymore, or the big corporate fraud cases are going to go away, and that's not at all what happened. You know, I was there for the first President Trump's first administration, and we were really busy, and you know, we were working on fraud cases, we were working on consumer protection related cases, and there may have been some differences in some of the minutia in terms of what we focused on, but you know, in terms of is the government still going to be doing these things? I mean, I think the answer is yes.
Yeah. Clint, I wanted to ask you kind of what your sweet spot is. Why would somebody call you and engage you in something? What is it basically life science companies calling you, academic medical centers? Like, tell me a little bit about who should be calling you and what you would be advising them on in your opinion.
Sure. So my sweet spot is government investigations and litigation. And
Okay.
and then my sweet spot is if you're doing that, if you have those types of issues in the healthcare setting, really in the FDA-related or research settings, but that's, that encompasses a lot. It's everything from product development all the way through approval, marketing and distribution, promotion, recall-related activities, all of that stuff, and it also incorporates not just obviously manufacturers and researchers, but all the different folks who are involved in distribution, which includes hospitals and pharmacies.
Gotcha. Okay.
The broader pharma services sector, which we've seen develop, which is contract research organizations and contract development, drug manufacturing organizations. So all of that stuff. But my practice really is around primarily when there is active government investigation, when you receive a civil investigative demand, a subpoena, some type of inquiry, and it's also preparing for that situation, which that's a big part of it. And
that was going to be my next question is, we mostly have compliance professionals as our audience here, and we're in the business of trying to prevent a call to you. So you get the call and you're like, oh, this is a mess, or allegedly a mess. And you probably could now tell us compliance officers, what are a couple of things we should do to kind of try to prevent the call to you?
Absolutely. And so that's a huge part of what I do.
Okay.
And what I really do there, I mean, I sort of had saw this when I was in government, but now I'm really doing it in the private sector, is I just sort of flip, just flipping everything from when I was in the government. So I'm using a lot of the same skill set, the same knowledge, but I'm turning it around and so that I'm thinking about, okay, here's the general situation that this company has encountered. How could this play out? And what does my government experience tell me are how would it grow? How could the government find out about it? How could it grow into a real problem? And that often involves, it's not just thinking about, well, if the Department of Justice finds out, what's going to happen?
Right.
Thinking about all the different agencies that are involved. I mean, it's FDA, it's HHS, it's DOJ, it's state attorney general's offices, and it's even other federal agencies like the SEC. And law enforcement agencies too, and thinking about all the different ways that this could percolate and hit one of those spots and potentially hit others, because these are all interconnected, all these different offices. I've seen it from the inside. They're all interconnected.
Right.
You often, one of the things that I always noticed is how a bad decision could set off sort of a domino effect for a company. That you make a bad decision, and maybe that solves an immediate problem with a regulator, or an immediate problem just in your business, without any government involvement. Right. The problem is it ends up getting compounded later on, and because somehow this comes up again later on, you have an employee who complains about it, you have a whistleblower.
Exactly.
And then it starts to be scrutinized in a different way, and it can build and build and build. And so one of the things that I think that I can help folks with is really focusing on how to handle a problem that comes up in day-to-day business in a way that protects you down the road, and also addresses your current immediate business need. Because we're obviously very sensitive to that. Companies need to be able to operate and be able to handle all kinds of moving parts, but you want to do it in a way that has integrity and that therefore protects you down the road, so that when somebody does come knocking, you're able to say, look, here's what we did. and you take the wind out of their sails in terms of their ability to criticize you and potentially investigate or prosecute you.
Yeah. Clint, I could talk to you all day, but we're running out of time here a little bit. Maybe I could ask one last question, and then if you have any last minute thoughts or something maybe I didn't ask you that you want to highlight. But compliance programs, we have these 7 elements of, you have policies, you're doing a hotline, you have monitoring and auditing, corrective action, all these different elements in a compliance program. Does 1 or 2 of those really stick out to you? Training, right? Training employees. Does 1 or 2 of those things really stick out to you in the work that you do? Or is it all of the above? Or any thoughts kind of on compliance programs in that regard?
Yeah. I mean, compliance programs are hugely important, and having one in the first place, a written compliance program, is just an absolute necessity in today's world. It's for the company's own ability to do these things that we're talking about, but also to protect itself down the road. Like, not having one is just, you're in a much worse spot. And while it's some work to put a compliance program together, it's 100% worth the investment given the consequences of not having one. In terms of the specific components of a compliance program and which one I would put the most emphasis on, I mean, none of those really, there's not one that I could really say I think sticks out more.
Sure.
I do think that one of the things, though, that I have seen that's more important is ensuring that you are somehow, that it's an active living thing. And so that can manifest in different ways. It could be by actually having a compliance officer or group of folks who are specifically assigned to be looking at that and be not just sort of following it mechanically,
right,
but continuing to build on it. Seeing when a problem does come up, looking at the compliance program and trying to figure out, does the compliance program cover this? Does it need to change? And how do we incorporate this new problem into the compliance program? So it's not just that, you have the document and you follow it.
right.
You have a structure in place through actual human beings in your company that allows for this to be really useful and to further the ultimate goal of compliance.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
That's how does that play out in a specific situation? It depends, but I think it's really important to think of it holistically, if that's a helpful way to put it, and not just mechanically.
Well, great. Clint, what didn't I ask you, or any last minute thoughts that you'd like to share, that you get the last word here?
Okay. Well, I think, you asked me a lot of great questions. I mean, I'm very happy to talk with you about this stuff. I think that, I'm really interested to see how the next year, the next several months plays out in this space, in this sector.
Yeah.
I do think that just going back to the compliance program point, I saw that become a much more significant focus of a lot of the work at the Department of Justice in recent years. And it's one of those things that I don't really see, I don't have a strong sense that it's going to change. I mean, I think that it's sort of something that under any administration, just as healthcare develops, it becomes more and more important. And, it's something that's looked at. It's not just looked at in the context of, like, did you have one or not? But there's now DOJ guidance on
That's right.
very specific aspects of this that are looking at it in terms of the charging decisions that are made. And then they're looking at it not just, this is one other point that I'll just mention briefly, because I think it's an important one. They look at it at the time of the offense. So if there's an investigation, they're going to look at what was the compliance program in place when this illegal conduct occurred.
Right.
And they're also going to look at it at the time that they make the charging decision, which is later. And so my point there is that you always have opportunities to continue to build and develop that program. If you didn't have a great one in place, or there are flaws,
right,
back 2 years ago, and there was a problem, That doesn't mean you just sort of say, well, we're going to
It's
be
all
accountable.
exactly.
No, you figure out, you identify the problem, you correct it, and you do things to prevent it from occurring again, and you do all that in writing. And
Exactly.
those are it's compliance. I think is just compliance programs specifically
Yeah.
are just a hugely important part of protecting yourself from government scrutiny.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of reiterate what you said. It may be rare, but the DOJ does at times issue declinations based off of an effective compliance program, or if you can demonstrate an effective compliance program and the misstep was a one-off, it can have some mitigating factors on penalties and those sorts of things. And then separate from the DOJ, OIG has its own exclusionary authority, and you don't want to be a bio life science company that's excluded from participating in Medicare. And so outside of DOJ, the OIG says, hey, we might have this corporate integrity agreement thing for you. And if anyone ever reads one of those, it's a compliance program. They're all public. Go read one now. If you don't have a compliance program, put one in proactively instead of being forced to put one in.
Yes, that's absolutely right. Because there are examples of you can find the starting point for a good compliance program just by typing that into Google right now,
Right.
And yes, being in a position where you can tell the HHS, OIG, DOJ, whomever, we're trying. We put
right.
this together, and while it didn't work perfectly in that one instance, I mean, and that's, I know our time is up, but I would say that that's one other thing that, like, from my perspective, and including when I was in government, is the compliance program is not really intended to be something that that 100% of the time prevents any conduct from occurring, right?
Exactly.
It's much more something that we realize that misconduct will occur. We have the compliance program in place, not necessarily to prevent that eventuality, but to ensure that when it does happen, we're able to address it appropriately. That's the advantage, and you're still going to encounter, employees who do things wrong or what have you, but the compliance program will help you navigate it and prove to folks later on that you were thinking about being responsible.
Exactly. Well said. Well, Clint, maybe we have you come back again, because I'm sure you have other things we could talk about. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise with us today.
Absolutely, CJ. My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me as a guest. And it's been fantastic talking to you today.
Great. And for all our listeners, we'll include in the show notes some contact information for Clint. And if you want to reach out that way, I'm sure he'll welcome those kinds of communications. And for all of our listeners, what we always ask of you at this point in the podcast is, if you know of a topic or you're aware of a speaker that you'd like to have addressed on the podcast, please let us know. We want to make sure we're addressing concepts and concerns and issues that are of interest to you. So until next time, everybody, take care.